A lot of good specific examples related to STEM. That's always good. Mine is just kind of a thought presentation here is what would it look like? What could it look like if we used universal design as a framework to underpin all of our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts on our campuses? And so we've done pieces of this at the University of Washington where I work, but certainly not all of it. Anyway, so bear with me now and we kind of talk about what would that look like? Could we be the leaders in our universal design efforts, in our DEI efforts on campus? So my name's Sheryl Burgstahler and I go by she and her. I run the Accessible Technology Services unit at the University of Washington in Seattle, and yes, it's raining. I run the IT accessibility team, which is our group on campus that ensures that the IT that we procure, develop, and use at the University of Washington is accessible to people with disabilities, including faculty, staff, students, and visitors to our websites. That's totally funded by the University of Washington. But starting in 1992, I did some serious grant writing and continue to do so because I wanted to expand our efforts beyond just the University of Washington and beyond just dealing with IT. So we started with a grant from the National Science Foundation and continue to be funded by them since then. We're supported with other federal grants from the U.S. Department of Education and other units, the state of Washington, corporate foundations, and private funds. And so we can continue this work. We have a whole bunch of different projects. I'll give you the URL for our website later. You might want to take a look at it. But the name of it is Do It, DO-IT, Disabilities, Opportunities, Internetworking, and Technology. We have a Do It Japan that started in 2007. You can Google that and you'll find a nice website, which has mostly Japanese writing in it. But anyway, it talks about the activities they do in Japan that are similar to what we're doing out of our home base in Seattle. We also started the Center on Universal Design in Education, starting in 1999. And we're the first group to take really detailed, comprehensive consideration of universal design in higher education. That was kind of an early adoption, but many groups now are addressing that as well. So we continue to update that center with new research and new promising and proven practices as we move forward. So we have an individual-centered community building model as far as our Do It Center. We take a look at the success of people with disabilities in academics and careers. And we look at the stakeholders. And then we have grant-funded projects and other efforts that deal with issues related to that stakeholder group. So of course, people with disabilities, we work with teenagers and college students, graduate students, people transitioning to careers who have disabilities, and provide mentors and other activities to help them be successful. We have a group that supports family members of people with disabilities, particularly family members working with their teenage children and helping them transition to adult life. We, of course, have peers and near peers. Those are just a little bit older than a student we're working with, mentors and allies that we work with, professional organizations to help them make their conferences accessible to people with disabilities. You're doing a great job here, by the way. And broadening participation efforts to make sure disability is included in those efforts. Post-secondary administrators, faculty, staff, service providers, tons of work there. Employers to make their employment opportunities welcoming and accessible to people with disabilities. Technology companies, we work with Microsoft and Google and Amazon to help them make whatever they're doing accessible to people with disabilities. Legislators, policymakers, funding agencies, you name it. And what we found is some stakeholders are just not doing their fair share. And so we kind of try to change that situation, often using carrots rather than sticks. And I'm sure everyone in this group is doing their share, but let's see if we can get more people to manage all the work that needs to be done. When we're working with students with disabilities, we promote self-determination with them, how to become self-advocates, how to get access to the resources, the technology, everything that you need to reach the goals that you have set for yourself. We're not talking about that part today. The other half of what we do has to do with universal design. And that's when we're talking to faculty and staff and institutions, technology companies, where we talk about the basic framework of universal design and its implications for those various stakeholder groups. So what I mean by an inclusive environment, what we're working for in our DEI efforts on our campuses, which are growing by the day. Anyone who meets the requirements of whatever you're offering, with or without accommodations, is encouraged to participate. Everyone feels welcome and is fully engaged in accessible and inclusive environments and activities. Accessible mean people with disabilities can actually use things, the technology or participation in class, but inclusive in that the environment is welcoming and includes as much as possible all participants using the same technology and activities. So I think what we need is a paradigm shift from a reactive reliance on accommodations alone. This idea that a student with disability comes to the university and let's get them set up with disability services and we'll just respond to the inaccessibility of our courses and our environments when that person experiences an inaccessibility, which many times, as we know in this audience, could have been avoided through the practice of universal design. So I think there's too much reliance on that. Nothing wrong with accommodations, but I think we use that method more than we need to and should. To a universal design of accessible and inclusive and sustainable products, environments, and services. In other words, our services and our products and the environments we're creating, how do we make them born accessible, born inclusive? And then we provide accommodations as needed to individuals who have needs beyond what we've provided as far as universal design. So I think the paradigm shift should be from the design for the average student or the average client or the average user of technology to design for everyone. But once upon a time, we actually did this way back in the 70s. What I have on the screen right now is a picture that appeared in the UW Daily. That's our student newspaper here at the University of Washington. This is 1970. And here we have a young man and on the back of his wheelchair, there's a sign in capital letters that says, "Ramp the curbs, get me off the street." And he was his little protest of one person. I don't know how many other people were doing the same. Back in 1970, all he wanted to do at the University of Washington that he couldn't do yet was just use the sidewalks. And we have these big curbs and he couldn't get up on them with his wheelchair. And so a lot of people at the time protested this thought that it was ridiculous. Look at all the sidewalks at the University of Washington. Look at all the sidewalks on all of our campuses across the country. No way are we going to put curb cuts in there and little ramps in there for the few students we have who use wheelchairs. As we all know, the end of the story is putting curb cuts and sidewalks is an expected best practice of any sidewalk design. And yes, it was extremely expensive back in the 70s to put curb cuts in old sidewalks, but it's not a lot more expensive to put a curb cut in a brand new sidewalk that you're creating. We've even added to the design you've noticed a lot of newer sidewalks, and the curb cuts actually have tactile bumps in them for individuals who have visual impairments and others to see that they're about to enter maybe a busy street. That's kind of a good thing when you think about it. And so that's a universal design experience in the physical environment that has been widely adopted. And so wouldn't it be cool if universal design in other contexts was widely adopted? I think that's what we're all here about in this particular conference. Great conference, by the way. And so what does a framework look like? And so I did a lot of research on this, and that, there isn't one answer to this, but I think looking at all these different frameworks for whatever, just in general, that they should have a scope. What are we talking about? There should be some kind of a definition of what we're doing in the framework. Then if a body of principles that are involved in that application, guidelines, which are just more detail as far as applying those principles, and then one step further, promising and some proven practices that we can apply as examples. And then what is the process of this particular framework? And so universal design is a framework. I'll go through a few of these in our short time here today to say how this might play out. So what would be your scope? Well, you choose. It could be your whole institution in a DEI effort. Or in my case, I work in the IT organization. We have a DEI effort within IT. And so I could just focus on that. Or you could focus on all instruction on your campus or at your institution, or all services, or all technology, or all physical spaces. What about a project? What about a conference and the exhibits and presentations and the professional organizations? We could take our scope to be one of those things, but there's another dimension of the scope when we're talking about DEI. If we take a look at students with diverse characteristics, they could be with respect to race, ethnicity, cultural background, sexual identity, socioeconomic level, age, how about marital status, religious beliefs, values, academic interests, work experience, specific abilities. So lots of things. And so how could we have a DEI framework that kind of set the stage for addressing all of these issues? So I think it's helpful in case of disability to use the word ability, because in DEI, I think we should be looking at the diversity in abilities we have. Some ability levels are labeled a disability, but everybody in this audience and everyone else, everywhere else has abilities, whether they have a disability or not. And so I have a scale here from way to the left, not able, to way to the right, able. And each person today in this presentation, you can rate yourself on each of these dimensions. For instance, the ability to understand English. You could rate yourself a little low on that scale because English is not your first language. Or it could be because of a disability, which makes it difficult for you to read or to understand English specifically. So in other words, an ability is not necessarily related to a disability. There are many contexts where you might have a low rating on ability. For instance, the ability to hear. If you're in a baby's room while they're sleeping and you have the sound turned off on your computer, you rate yourself quite not able to hear at that particular instance. So it's complicated. So you rate also your social norms, the ability to see or hear or walk, read, print, write with a pen or pencil, communicate verbally, tune out distraction, learn and manage physical and mental health. I think everyone at this conference could fill out a worksheet with a scale like this, and not one of us would be identical to someone else. The point being, diversity is quite diverse, even with respect to ability. So let's just accept that. It's very diverse. Even two people, as we know in this group, who are blind, who have different issues in access to technology and so forth because of their unique needs or interests. Another thing to point out that values universal design, promotes this approach, is most disabilities are not even obvious to other people. We can't just look in our Zoom rooms and see who might have a disability. Most are not obvious. And also in a post-secondary setting, fewer than a third of students with disabilities actually report them to the Disability Services Office. And so faculty can't even rely on the letters that come to them asking for accommodations for a particular student to tell them who in their class might have a disability. Another point is that disability services, who do a great job at providing accommodations, are just focused on that. And so they work with individual students, but they're working after the inaccessibility has been found. Where universal design, as we know, it tries to minimize those inaccessibilities in the first place. And so that is an issue to consider as well. And we also have to consider intersectionality, which complicates all these issues for a student who has a certain type of disability, but is also female or a racial ethnic minority or an older student. All sorts of diversity appears when we look at that. And so the accommodations only approach certainly does not work really well as it's currently practiced. So what do I mean by an accommodation? To make it clear, I'm meaning that there's an existing product or an environment, and that there is a disconnect between that product or environment and a person with a disability. They can't use it, they can't participate, whatever. So common online learning, for example, accommodations are creating accessible documents. A lot of PDFs are inaccessible to people who are blind or even students who have a reading-related disability like dyslexia, because they want to use their text-to-speech software to read aloud the text, and maybe the text isn't even available. So that's an inaccessible feature. If we applied universal design, all those documents would be designed accessibly and a person wouldn't need an accommodation. Captioning videos. If we captioned all our videos and made them accurate, we wouldn't have that accommodation either. Sign language interpreters, we will always need sign language interpreters, which are usually provided at the request of an individual, so as an accommodation. But in this conference, I believe every presentation, it has a sign language interpreter available. So you're building that into your conference as a universal design feature. So what's universal design? I like the basic definition by the Center on Universal Design. The design of products, environments, to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. It doesn't mean that you won't need some specialized design. It just means you're going to minimize it, that you're thinking ahead, you're being proactive, and you're making whatever you're designing, a course, a service, technology, technically accessible to people with disabilities, but also usable by them, that it's easy to follow the instructions, to figure out how to get a certain command in for a function you want in a technology and so forth. But also it's inclusive. So for the most part, we can all participate in the same activities in a course, or we can access a service in the same way if it's universally designed. Just a real quick example in the physical environment. When we look at ADA compliant entrances to buildings, sometimes they look like this. I have an image on the screen where we have 2 steps into the main entrance. To the left, we have an ADA compliant ramp, fairly short ramp. It has handrails and is quite usable by anyone who needs to use it. But if I enter this building with my colleague who's using a wheelchair, at the point where that ramp starts, we part ways. They go one way, I go the other way, and we'll meet at the top of the stairs. So it's accessible, it's quite usable, but it's not inclusive. Where the second image is of even an older building here at the University of Washington, where the main entrance has a gradually sloping, very long and quite wide ramp, which is the main entrance to the building. Again, if I'm walking side by side with a wheelchair user, we continue to walk into the building, roll into the building the same way. We do not have to have our conversation interrupted by having 2 different ways to access the entrance. It's also wide enough that people that were coming the opposite direction can pass us while we're side by side. That is what inclusive means. And so universal design goes beyond accessibility. It goes beyond usability to make things inclusive as much as possible. By the way, there are a lot of steps in that building. And so if you want to use the steps, you certainly are welcome to do so. But the main entrance is the one that is most inclusive. So we can look at beneficiaries of universal design. There's simple examples like captions on videos, people who are unable to hear the video, people who are English language learners benefit from captions as long as they're accurate. People in noisy or noiseless environments like an airport or a baby's room. People who have a slow internet connection and they just want to read the text. People who want to know the spelling of words. That's pretty much all of us. And who need to find content quickly. You can use a tool to search those text-based captions. So universal design benefits a lot of people, including our smartphones, where the features are built in to reverse the color of the text and the background, to increase the size of the letters on the screen. These features are built in. They used to be provided through assistive technology, software or hardware that might connect to a computer or another device for people who have disabilities. And so they would have these add-ons. We still have a need for assistive technology, for instance, Braille printers or embossers for people that want to convert text to Braille. And so it's important that our technology too is compatible with those assistive technologies. But again, universal design of technology minimizes the need for those assistive technologies. There is a real rich history on the principles and guidelines for universal design. I consider 3 sets as the ones that can underpin a framework for a post-secondary institution and cover all that we do there. There are the 3 principles for the universal design of learning, which many of the talks, including the one right before this one, when the speakers talked about those principles. There are the essential 7 principles of universal design, again, covered in the last presentation. But there are 4 other ones that I think are important. And that are the 4 principles that underpin the universal design of IT. The guidelines that result from those principles are called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And so I think if we look at these 3 sets of principles and guidelines and practices, you've covered all the bases. How to design a makerspace. The 7 principles of universal design will help you with that. How to design your course to make sure that it's inclusive. UDL, plus those basic universal design principles apply, as well as the IT accessibility guidelines. And so if we look at all of them together, this is a dramatic simplification. But if we follow these 2 statements, we will go a long way to make things inclusive of people with disabilities in everything that we do in an educational setting. So provide multiple ways for participants to learn, to demonstrate what they have learned, and to engage. For example, in a course, offering some content in a video, but also in a printed publication. The second one, ensuring that all technologies, facilities, services, resources, and strategies, all these things are accessible to individuals with a wide variety of disabilities. Frankly, I go to a lot of universal design presentations, not here, but at other conferences where they promote UDL, but they're not talking about accessible resources as well. So in the first case, if you were going to offer a video and a publication to your students on a particular topic, the first principle would say that's a good thing. You're offering options. But unless you make each of those things, the websites and the documents, fully accessible to people with disabilities, you haven't met the second criteria. And so you can still block out a lot of students that could benefit from that learning. And so making things inclusive, having flexibility is what it's all about, but we need accessibility in all we do. If you look at these 3 sets of practices that result from UD, UDL, and WCAG, you can apply them to instruction or services or information technology or physical spaces. And each one has different things that you do in those particular areas that you want to make inclusive. So instruction, for instance, the class climate, the interaction, the physical environments, and so forth, we need to address all. But in all cases, there's an aspect of the application that has to do with the accommodations as well, where it's important to provide accommodations when they're needed with everything that we're doing. So there are a lot of practices that come from this. And we can also consider universal design as a topic covered in instruction, like a computer science class or an engineering class, communications, social work. Imagine if all of our students at our institutions knew about universal design when they graduated in their field practice. And so the universal design for higher education framework, in other words, includes scope and definition and principles and guidelines and practices, and even a process for application. So let's get back to that DEI model that I said I would present, which is underpinned by a universal design and higher education framework. So imagine a higher education institution. And so I have kind of a flow chart here, or logic model. And I think you can start with your vision. What is the vision? On our campus, let's say our vision is an inclusive campus for everybody. Then put in what your values are. You can find them on your website for your organization. I found on the UW one, diversity, equity, inclusion, and compliance are clear values of the University of Washington. The framework then is the Universal Design Higher Education Framework with the scope, et cetera. So that would be our framework. And then we'd look at current practices like funding, stakeholder roles, policies, guidelines, procedures, training, support on our campus in the case of the UW. But then you think, well, what new practices do we want that better reflect this universal design of higher education framework? Well, you need measures and benchmarks, you need these new practices in the same categories. And then you measures and benchmarks and data analysis and reports as far as the outcomes and outputs you could collect to see if your new practices are actually working. And then you'd look at the impact to determine how it's the impact, the outcomes suggest that you're making some headway in your values. How do they support diversity, equity, inclusion, and compliance? And then how can we modify those to make them even better? Some people worry about universal design as diluting the special needs of individual groups. I don't see that at all. And this is the way I look at it. There's an image here on the screen. Universal design practices for everyone on our campus. The universal design practice for everyone would be if we did an analysis of things that could be done for any underrepresented groups. We did this in one of our DEI efforts. We went through every webpage of the central IT organization, and we removed or changed wording that we felt that was discriminatory or inappropriate, that deals with various groups like Native Americans, racial ethnic minorities, people with disabilities. And so we changed some of those words. Okay, that's a universal design practice that would benefit everyone. You do it together. And so other things like that, like having a list of lectures or books we're going to read, making sure, for instance, of disability, that in our DEI efforts, disability is included too, so their stories get represented. And then we'd have the unique needs of individual groups. All of them have them, but they would go beyond the general needs of everyone to those unique needs. So practices that are unique to women, to Black students, to Hispanic students, to students with disabilities, whatever we decide as our categories of diversity. And so that's what our model could look like if we were applying universal design to DEI campus-wide. So the resources on the screen right now, I point to the Center for Universal Design in Education at uw.edu/CUDE. And there you'll find a framework for inclusive practices. You'll find 20 tips for teaching an accessible online course. You'll find a knowledge base of over 700 articles of Q&As and promising practices and case studies. And you'll even find information about a book that I published this last year, Creating Inclusive Learning Opportunities in Higher Education, a Universal Design Toolkit. And if you want to just talk to me, I'm Sheryl Burgstahler at SHERYLB@uw.edu. So thanks for joining me today.